Del Pidio are all very familiar names to me, especially one for the US and a little bit of you know, country support there for myself. But a lot of really big names, and we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of what matches we have left. So, we're lucky to be able to feature two matches from China today, and we'll be able to start off with one right off the bat with Chen Bihuan.
Yeah, we can see how the teams are doing now. And now that we are in the weekend, a few more matches will have been played at this point. So we can see here that China do have 2 wins at the moment. You do need those 4 wins to be able to advance into the top four and the semi-finals. So China just need 2 more.
Yeah, absolutely. And they could get it all on stream today with 2 wins, which is very exciting to pay attention to, especially if Bihuan is able to get that win today. Could put a really cool spot for that third game that we have. I'm loving Ditto, Jamie. I still love Ditto. I will never not love Ditto. Also looking at Tapu Lele, some Calyrex, four really standard restricted Pokemon here, but a couple of really interesting kind of tech tools that I'm seeing with them. So I know I'm hoping to see some really interesting stuff throughout the day, but it's we're hitting that point in the bracket where it's better to play it with, very good, very safe, very standard Pokemon towards the end so that you don't put yourself in a rough matchup by accident.
Yeah, you definitely be wanting to be bringing the best team you possibly could. Whether that is a comfort pick with all the Pokemon that are top of the meta, or if you want to try and catch your opponents off guard, you still can go for them. Slightly niche picks. As we can see there are a couple of Pokemon like that Ditto. There's the Araquanid you can see there as well. And we can have a look at what the players are going to be bringing to this matchup to see if there's anything else. Whether they're going to be going more of the meta or more of the off meta picks. And it looks like we're going with the Xerneas team here. Paired up with that Incineroar, Entei, Venusaur, Torkoal, and Indeedee. So definitely a pairing of Pokemon that we've seen before with that Xerneas.
Yeah, I like the Indeedee. Oftentimes you see the Amoonguss with that in Xerneas because it is, it's such a great partner Pokemon. But now you have the opportunity for Sleep with Venusaur and some more offensive power, especially getting the sun up. But you do have 3 fire types on this team, Jamie. So if he is facing something down like a Kyogre, it can be a pretty tough spot matchup-wise just to make sure that you pivot around and get that sun and that weather exactly where you need it to be.
Yeah, and the Venusaur will somewhat help out with that, even if it's not in the sun, not benefiting from the chlorophyll. It'll still be able to deal with the Kyogre reasonably well. And you do want to be very offensive against the steel types that do threaten the Xerneas. That is the reason why you've got so many fire types. There's very strong against the steel types like the Zacian that would really threaten the Xerneas as the setup, because that is the main focus on this team for sure. You want to get your Xerneas set up with that Indeedee and the Incineroar to help support and get that redirection, and then the other 3 Pokemon benefiting from the sun to be able to counter what should beat the Xerneas. So I have to see if China are going to be bringing something that will be able to counter this Xerneas here, and we can have a look at what there's going to be run here for Chen Bihuan, and it looks like it is going to be a Calyrex Shadow Rider team, paired up with that Incineroar, Regieleki, Rillaboom, Mienshao, and Amoonguss.
One thing I'm immediately noticing off the bat, Jamie, is 2 really important Pokemon for sleep, but you have to, this is one of those games where you really have to see exactly which Pokemon are carrying that safety goggles, because if you bring something like the Rillaboom and the Amoonguss, and if you have safety goggles and Incineroar, that means 3 Pokemon in your team can be, won't have to worry too much about something like won't have to worry about sleep as much, or even the spore. But Calyrex is a really strong pick. It's one of those Pokemon that if you can get it in that right situation, especially maybe paired with some Electro Webs to slow down the opponent's Pokemon, you can just start firing off Astral Barrages and get up those Grim Naboo super fast and just completely dominate before that opponent can get their Geomancy up.
Yeah, when you've got a Calyrex Shadow Rider, you want to be hitting that Xerneas before that Geomancy gets set up for sure. Because if that Geomancy gets set up, it's going to be able to shrug off the Astral Barrages pretty comfortably at that point. Amoonguss would definitely be the best way through the Xerneas, being able to resist the Fairy type attacks that come out, put it to sleep. Maybe it has access to Clear Smog as well as a counter potentially to the Xerneas. So it doesn't really seem outside of the Amoonguss. If the Geomancy gets set up, it looks like Bihuan could have a bit of an awkward time. But then you've got to have ways around even stopping the Xerneas from being able to set up. You could potentially have knockoff on the Mienshao as well. Just being able to hit it really hard before it sets up the Geomancy, because that Calyrex and the Regieleki is so fast as well.
Yeah, and Mienshao, like you said, could be a really good choice too, moving into team preview, especially if it is carrying something like Wide Guard and that Xerneas only has Dazzling Gleam, even though most of them run either Moonblast and Dazzling Gleam, or Moonblast in a different move. Sometimes we've been seeing Substitute a little bit more as well. But, you know, it could be something that could be really useful against, you know, some double targeting moves, even something like a Heat Wave if any of these Pokemon are carrying it. I think Indeedee is a really nice choice too because there are three really good fake out users on this team to be aware of. So having Indeedee to pair with Xerneas, I think could be a really nice choice.
Yeah, and we get, with the sneak peek of the items as well, we can already see the safety goggles on that Indeedee. That's going to be a really, really nice pairing with the Xerneas, because you'll be able to redirect the Amoonguss, won't be able to be spored at all, will keep it safe from anything like a Clear Smog, and then if it's facing down the Calyrex Shadow Rider, it's going to be immune to the Astral Barrages as well, so that would be a really nice pairing with the Xerneas going into this matchup, because Amoonguss would have been the main way of being able to deal with the Xerneas, just putting it to sleep, resisting its attacks at that point, because if the Xerneas gets up its Geomancy, it's going to be in a really, really strong position against this team. If it does carry the substitute, it's going to be even more worthwhile against the Amoonguss because you can just substitute on the spores, even if the Indeedee is taken care of at that point. But if it is opting for both the Moonblast and the Dazzling Gleam, that opens up the Mean Shower a little bit more. Let's try and catch some of those Dazzling Gleams with the potential wide guard that it could have access to. And you could just be going for the Fake Out cycling as well with the Mean Shout, Rillaboom, and Incineroar. So 3 potential Fake Outs that could come out for Bihuan's side of the field. Maybe being able to just pivot around the Xerneas by just putting a stop to it from being able to attack, so that you can slowly chip away with your Calyrex Shadow Rider.
Yeah, but Jamie, we are about to get into our very first match of the day. Game 1, Match 1 versus China and versus Singapore here. We're going to see immediately what these leads are. It is that Calyrex and that Regieleki, so able to possibly set up some Electro Webs. Indeedee and Xerneas, though, so no Fake Out early on, especially because of the Psychic Terrain that'll be going up here, but some pretty strong attackers right off the gate.
Yeah, you want to be hitting that Xerneas before the Geomancy, and leading with the Regieleki and the Calyrex Shadow Rider is definitely going to be able to do that. You do have access to Electro Web on the Regieleki to try and cancel out some of those speed boosts that you'd be getting from the Geomancy. And maybe being able to get that Electro Web off when the Geomancy is activated, you're only at +1 speed, and you shouldn't even be outspeeding the Regieleki at that point. That would allow a second Electro Web to just cancel out the speed boost at that point. Sometimes Indeedees do carry Shadow Ball to be able to deal with the Calyrex Shadow Rider because it's got its normal typing. It can take on Shadow Rider very, very well. If it doesn't have access to the Shadow Ball, the Follow Me redirection won't really help out this Xerneas at this point because it's likely we're going to be seeing 2 spread type attacks coming out from the Regieleki and the Calyrex. It may just go on the offensive with the Regieleki. It could just straight up go for the Thunderbolt if they're expecting the Thunderbolt and Astral Barrage to still be enough to pick up the KO on the Xerneas. You don't even need to opt for the Electro at that point. But the Xerneas is definitely not going to take anything this time because it is going to be protecting itself.
Yeah, a great protect, but that Volt Switch from the Regieleki into the Indeedee brings the Indeedee well down over half of its HP there and allows for a pivot into a different Pokemon, maybe for Bihuan, who could possibly send in something that may be better to deal with the Pokemon on Hakim's side. It is that Incineroar. So Incineroar, if it's carrying something like Parting Shot, could be a really nice way to deal with this Xerneas, even if it can't go for a Fake Out here. Intimidate's not going to do too much to 2 special attackers. Psyshock is the move of choice, though, for this Calyrex. Does a really good chunk of damage, gets Indeedee down into the bottom 25% of its health, who now goes for an Expanding Force, and that isn't going to do any damage to that Dark-type Incineroar by getting that Regieleki off the field, and does very little damage onto the Calyrex Shadow Rider as well.
That's an amazing play to start off the game for Bihuan, just completely ignoring the Xerneas. That would have been a free Geomancy at that point, but really smart targeting, expecting to protect on the Xerneas. Again, the Regieleki to switch out into your Incineroar. Maybe you carry Raw on the Incineroar. Even if you don't, you still get to KO the Indeedee at this point with a Psyshock, or you still get the damage onto the Xerneas before the Geomancy with the Astral Barrage as well. And then you can go for the Parting Shot into the Xerneas. Rather than reducing the speed of the Geomancy with the Regieleki, you can start reducing the special attack boost with your Parting Shots. Maybe some Snarls as well on the Incineroar. I have to see what it's going to be carrying there, because the move choices on the Incineroar could be pretty crucial here. If it's got the Snarl, that will really put a stop to the Xerneas damage outputs, but Helping Hand is definitely going to help out with that.
Yeah, Helping Hand gonna boost whatever the Xerneas goes for, but Astral Barrage will come out first. Won't affect that Indeedee, but just going for that big damage onto that Xerneas, who doesn't have any boosts yet. Gets it down to just above half of its HP. It goes for the Moonblast here into the Calyrex with that Helping Hand boost. That is enough to knock it out, which is absolutely huge to get that big threat off of the field right now for Hakim. So that Helping Hand plus that little bit of chip damage from that Expanding Force could have been really massive. A Flare Blitz from the Incineroar into the Xerneas as well. Gets it down to just above 25% of its HP. Gets a little bit of recoil, but most importantly now, Calyrex is off the field.
Yeah, you've lost the restricted for Bihuan's side of the field, but you've done a lot of damage to the Xerneas at this point. Probably not in Electro Web range at this point. but still going to be so low that you can't really set up a Geomancy anymore, especially when you're facing down the Regieleki. If it goes for the Electro Web and you go for your Geomancy, Regieleki's still probably outspeeding, and 2 Electro Webs, factoring in the second one hitting a special defense boost, should probably still pick up the knockout on this Xerneas, and you still got to contend with the damage that can come out from the Incineroar as well. Indeed, it's going to be pretty close if that's going to be in range of Electro Web as well. So if that is the move of choice for the Regieleki, it's going to come down to the training of the Pokemon, whether they're able to survive. If they are able to survive, you can potentially get an expanding force into the Regieleki, and that will do a huge amount of damage. But Xerneas probably going to go on the offensive rather than get the Geomancy up, and that's still going to do a huge amount of damage to the Regieleki as well, because it is so frail.
Yeah, absolutely. Indeed, he goes for the follow me, though, so if this is an Electro Web, it will be a nice double target, but most importantly, getting that Incineroar away as well. Electro Web, like you said, indeed, he actually avoids it here, interestingly enough, so it will still hit on that Xerneas. It is enough to knock it out, actually, so that now that Xerneas is off of the field as well, wasn't able to get anything like a Geomancy up, and this Indeedee is going to take a Flare Blitz, and this should be easily enough to get that knockout on the Indeedee, and bring Hakim down to the last 2 Pokemon in his party, which we know is going to be the Entei, and I believe the Incineroar. Yeah, the Incineroar as well.
So trading effectively restricted at this point. Just a turn later, the Regieleki being strong enough to pick up that last little bit on the Xerneas with the Electro Web as well. So yeah, with Incineroar and Entei joining the field at this point, the Regieleki's still going to be outspeeding both the Pokemon. The Psychic Terrain is still up, so there's no Fake Outs that can come out. So really, you get to launch your Electro type attack of choice with the Regieleki at this point, thanks to your own Psychic Terrain, stopping your own Fake Outs. So a little bit of an awkward position for Hakim, because we've still got a Pokemon waiting in the back for Bihuan. So if that's something like the Mean Shao, that will be able to knock out this Incineroar in 1 hit. And if you get the Electro Webs down onto the Entei, the Mean Shao should still be outspeeding the Entei as well, even if it is carrying the Choice Scarf item. And Close Combat's going to be doing a lot of damage. If it is going to be something like the Rillaboom or the Amoonguss, that's not going to be able to take on the Entei or the Incineroar very well at all, and maybe in the Entei's and Incineroar's favour. So it is going to come down to what that final Pokemon that Bihuan did bring to that match. It could potentially be that Amoonguss, because Amoonguss is one of the best Pokemon on Bihuan's team into the opposing Xerneas, but that's another Electro Web miss coming out from the Regieleki.
Yeah, but it misses on the slower of the 2 Pokemon with that Incineroar, so it still slows that Entei down, gets a really nice amount of damage. Stomping Tantrum is a hidden move here for Hakim that he's showing to Bihuan, which is a really nice piece of information to note for Bihuan later, and then also shows that this Incineroar is not carrying something like that Safety Goggles, instead a Citrus Berry as it heals up some of its HP. Throat Chop, though, from one Incineroar into the other could possibly stop a Parting Shot, which it does, so a really nice use of Throat Chop there to make sure that that Incineroar can't cycle back in and out and get a Fake Out later.
And one of the nice things about having the faster Incineroar as well is always an awkward one with the Incineroars, whether you want to be fast to have the faster Fake Outs, and also another benefit of being fast to get that Throat Chop to stop the Parting Shots, or do you want the potential slower Parting Shots, which is detrimental here for Bihuan being the slower Incineroar and not being able to switch out and effectively wasting that turn. But being able to take the Stomp Tantrum reasonably well, especially with the Citrus Berry, it could potentially be taking another one. It's pretty smart move to lock into that Stomping Tantrum with the Entei. It's going to be doing reasonable damage to the Regieleki as well. But yeah, Incineroar is going to be switching out. We're going to reveal the final Pokemon here. And it is going to be the Amoonguss, and that's not what you want to see against the Entei and Incineroar.
Absolutely not, especially when they both take an Electro Web, slowing Entei down to -2 speed and Incineroar down to -1. And this Incineroar, if it went for another Throat Chop, isn't going to be able to really do too much to that Amoonguss. Instead, the Stomping Tantrum here from the Entei into that Regieleki doesn't reveal if it's a Focus Sash or not, and if it is broken, but doesn't get it down to that 1 HP. Flare Blitz, though, into that Regieleki is enough to at least knock it out from this Incineroar. And then you have, again, like you said, you still have that Incineroar coming back in. And if this is right, yep, and it is, the Psychic Terrain is now gone. So now you can get that Fake Out off this turn and put something to sleep, maybe.
Yeah, you'd only be able to Fake Out the Incineroar, though, because of the inner focus on the Entei. But we have seen it go for the Stomping Tantrum twice in a row now. It hasn't technically been revealed that it is Choice Scarf. We do get the slight information being able to see that it is locked into that Stomping Tantrum. So it really does have to be the Incineroar that deals with the Amoonguss. But Bihuan doesn't actually have confirmation of that at the moment. So maybe you do still want to be going for the Fake Outs into the Incineroar, get that Spore down onto either Pokemon. We know that there's the Safety Goggles on the Indeedee, but since Safety Goggles is a pretty common item choice on opposing Incineroars as well, so it could be still a bit awkward to go for those spores, but no Fake Out at all here.
Yeah, just another Stomping Tantrum, able to actually take out that Incineroar here. Hakim is actually really taking this back by not having that Fake Out and not able to put something to sleep so early. Flare Blitz, though, reveals the Occa Berry on this Amoonguss, so Amoonguss not going to be taking the full brunt of damage from this fire type attack does only take about 25%, so a really nice piece of information for Hakim to find out, especially with 3 types of Pokemon on his team. Pollen Puff fails though, and that is huge because now that Amoonguss wasn't able to put anything to sleep and just kind of took that damage for nothing.
Yes, there's 2 effectively wasted turns coming up for Bihuan. The Throat Chop turn when it got Throat Chopped on the parting shot. Now the side Pollen Puff not being able to heal up that Incineroar. It did look like it was very close whether it would be able to survive that Stomping Tantrum, but it seems like it wasn't. And the Pollen Puff would have been very nice. It would allow the Incineroar to survive another one of those Stomping Tantrums. You'd be able to get some good damage off with your Incineroar at that point as well, because it was going on the offensive, so potentially going for something like a Flare Blitz or a Throat Chop, or any choice of Dark-type move into the opposing Entei, because it had taken a reasonable amount of damage with that Electro Web. May have been in range of a Dark-type move, maybe not from a Flare Blitz, but it was pretty close in that endgame. And it ended up being the fact that it was Amoonguss in the back. It makes perfect sense to bring Amoonguss when you are facing down a Xerneas. A little bit awkward when you're facing down three fire types, but it still makes sense. But if it was something like the Mean Shell, that would have been really, really strong in that endgame, because the Entei had taken 2 Electro Webs. You're definitely outspeeding both the Pokemon, and at that point you'd have been able to knock out both of them in one shot with the close combats. So a bit awkward having that Amoonguss, and because you dealt with the Xerneas quickly enough, you didn't even have to deal with the Geomancy. It just went on the offensive. It protected on that first turn, and you managed to make the Bihuan made the very nice call, double targeting the Indeedee instead of the Xerneas, and even without the Geomancy being set up, Hakim was still able to take the game with the Entei and the Incineroar in the back. Because the Pokemon that were doing the big damage, like the Calyrex Shadow Rider, they were taken care of by the Xerneas even without the Geomancy. That meant that the Entei was slightly opened up to be able to go on the offensive with its Stomping Tantrums, because it was super effective against the Regieleki, it was super effective against the Incineroar, and was able to get a 2-shot onto that Incineroar, factoring in that little bit of Flare Blitz chip into it as well, or the Throat Chop, I should say, at the previous turn as well. So maybe it may have to consider bringing something like the Mean Shell to deal with the Pokemon, the Fire-type Pokemon in the back, because Amoonguss doesn't want to be doing that. If you're bringing your Amoonguss, you want it to beat the Xerneas. That would be the main reason you would be bringing it at this point. And if you dealt with the Xerneas with your other Pokemon, Amoonguss kind of becomes useless at that point, especially facing down a team with 3 Fire types. The Indeedee as well is going to be doing very well against the Amoonguss, especially with that safety goggles as well. So if you know now that you can deal with Xerneas without the Amoonguss, maybe you do leave it on the bench. A Rillaboom should not be coming to this match at all. It would be the Mean Shell that should be the adjustment, if that is the choice for Bihuan to make.
Yeah, like you said, also with that Electro Web, missing on that Incineroar allowed for that parting shot to not go off because of that Throat Chop. So another really pivotal play from that last game too, that I think, shows exactly how important those Electro Webs can be when you're trying to get your sound-based moves off in front of a Pokemon that knows a move that can stop them. But instead, we have the lead of Amoonguss and Calyrex here, so no Regieleki in this turn, and Xerneas and Indeedee. So immediately a threat onto the field for this Xerneas. Indeedee is going to be able to possibly redirect those moves, though it does not know that this Indeedee is safety goggles, which is absolutely a huge bit of knowledge that is possibly going to be revealed right in this very first turn, especially if this Amoonguss goes for something like a Spore or a Clear Smog if it's carrying it. We know it has Pollen Puff as well.
Yeah, the fact that there's safety goals on this Indeedee, this is exactly the lead you want for Hakim. But Bihuan doesn't know at this point. You haven't been able to find out the item on that Indeedee. This would be a pretty reasonable lead against a non-safety goggles Indeedee, because you're going to be able to put one of them to sleep. You'll be able to get some good damage with the Astral Barrage before that Xerneas gets the Geomancy, and then you can put the Xerneas to sleep the next turn with the Amoonguss, because it will be able to just resist that the fairy type attacks that come out from the Xerneas for days. But yeah, Indeedee having the safety goggles here, this changes this lead dynamic completely at this point. You just get to click follow me like the Indeedee is doing, and that Xerneas is getting its Geomancy.
Yeah, nasty plot actually from the Calyrex too, so it's not going to be taking any damage from that Astral Barrage. Instead, you're going to get that +2 special attack boost, while Xerneas also gets its own +2 special attack boost, but also boosting its special defense and speed with this Geomancy that it is going to be able to get off pretty much for free this turn, which is going to put it in a really nice spot, as it will still be faster than the Calyrex, and if it's able to knock it out in one hit on the next turn, it won't be taking another +2 special attack from that Calyrex, almost like it got 2 Grimnay boosts either. Instead, we see the Spore, safety goggles, Indeedee, a really nice choice here. So now Bihuan's on a bit of a back foot.
Yeah, and we saw in the previous game, Slice Shot was still doing reasonable damage to the Indeedee, but still not enough with the nasty plot boost. You get to just click follow me and Dazzling Gleam at this point. The Calyrex will be knocked out by the combination of two Dazzling Gleams. You get to keep it safe, present it safe from the Amoonguss with the Follow Me's. Maybe if it goes for the Pollen Puff and the +2 Side Shock, that could be enough to be able to KO the Indeedee. You'd at least be able to get the Spore off into the Xerneas on the next turn, but if you KO the Indeedee, that gives you the free switch into a Fire type that can still do some very good damage to the Amoonguss. Even though it's got access to the Occa Berry, it's going to still be taking some very good damage from the Xerneas, and in combination with some Fire type attacks, that could be very bad for this Amoonguss.
Dazzling Gleam is not enough to knock out either of these Pokemon. Psyshock, though, at +2 is going to go into this Indeedee, does a ton of damage, still just over half, though, and that Pollen Puff is redirected into the Indeedee as well. And so that Indeedee is not knocked out, though. This Indeedee is going to be able to go for one more Follow Me next turn, which unless this Calyrex has some sort of Protect or a switch in, it is going to get knocked out with that +2 special attack boost that it worked so hard for.
It doesn't even need to Follow Me at this point. You can go on the offensive with the Indeedee at this point. You can just go for the Dazzling Gleam. That's going to be able to KO the Calyrex, and then the follow-up Expanding Force should be able to KO the Amoonguss.
Yeah, Protect, though, from Calyrex. So this Calyrex not getting knocked out just yet. So this Follow Me may still prevent something like a Spore in case this Amoonguss went for something like that. And this Dazzling Gleam will do a pretty good chunk of damage to this Amoonguss. We saw that it obviously isn't the most effective of moves against Amoonguss, but it does get it down into the bottom 50%. That Spore once again into that safety goggles. So you can still go for it one more time, especially now that you've burned one Protect.
Yeah, and this Xerneas is very much looking like it's going to run away with the game at this point. There's no more resists for one side of the field. The Amoonguss is taking so much damage that you can't really call it a resist at this point. And whatever's waiting in the back is not going to enjoy taking these +2 attacks from this Xerneas. You just get to click Dazzling Gleam once again. You can click Follow Me if you're expecting the Spore, but you can still get the knockout with the Expanding Force. If something like the Incineroar switches in, it's just going to take a +2 Dazzling Gleam. So it's a very, very awkward position for Bihuan, especially because they're not getting that double Protect.
Yeah, that double Protect fail means that you're going to be losing your Calyrex, and this Amoonguss is going to be down at very, very little HP. Almost a Feather could really knock it over at this point, but Expanding Force should do the job just fine, especially with single target damage. So now you've got two Pokemon in the back that Bihuan's going to have to send in against this Geomancied Xerneas. So it's a bit of a tougher spot, I think, too, because, you know, Bihuan had a great lead for Xerneas Indeedee, but not Xerneas Safety Goggles Indeedee, JB.
It just shows how much a game can change by just one tiny choice in team building. Whether that is an item, whether that's just how fast you've made your Pokemon, how bulky you've made your Pokemon. Regieleki and Incineroar joining the field are not going to enjoy the +2 Dazzling Beams that can just come out from this Xerneas at this point. There's no Fake Out that can come out from the Incineroar because that Psychic Terrain is still in play. You could just go for a Follow Me, try and take away any of those attacks that come out from the Regieleki, but you don't really need to at this point. You've got the bulk to be able to shrug off the Regieleki. Incineroar's not going to be doing enough damage to the Xerneas, even though it's hitting on the physical side. Really, you just get to click 2 Dazzling Gleams at this point. That should be enough to pick up the knockout on both Pokemon, especially if the Indeedee goes for something like Helping Hand to increase the damage output even further, which is exactly what we're seeing.
Yeah, the Helping Hand will at least be able to get a lot of damage off onto both of these Pokemon. Electro Web, though, the first bit of damage this Xerneas has taken. So now this Xerneas does get that speed drop, which should, of course, it's already still slower than that, than the Regieleki, but now you know at least the exact speed tier. Dazzling Gleam enough, though, to knock out that Regieleki. Not enough to knock out this Incineroar, which is going to eat its Citrus Berry. It could go for something like a Parting Shot, but I think at this point in the game, you would need to just get some damage off. Flare Blitz will do damage, of course. It will do some damage to yourself, and then you still have two more Pokemon in the back to deal with it. So I think Hakim has wrapped this game up very, very nicely for Singapore and put a win on the board for them.
And it just shows you still need to be respecting Xerneas. And if your only resist is the Amoonguss and you're facing down on safety goggles, then it's not really going to be able to put in the work that you need it to at that point. Because there's no fairy resist outside of it, so on the one side of the field. If you get that Geomancy up, you can take on the rest of the Pokemon really, really comfortably. The Incineroar just joining the field, getting the Intimidate down doesn't really matter. You're just going to click one fairy move, whether it's Moonblast or Dazzling Gleam. That's going to be able to pick up the knockout onto the opposing Incineroar. So in the first game, it's made some very nice plays for Bihuan, trying to get around that Xerneas. Denied the Geomancy effectively, but in this game too, once the Geomancy got set up, the Xerneas still had full HP at that point, and there wasn't really any way back into that game, and it just shows how easily a Xerneas can just snowball completely through a game.
Yeah, absolutely. And Xerneas is one of those Pokemon that, Like you said, you have to respect it. Bihuan was able to take out that Xerneas really early, even though he lost his own Calyrex in the process. And I think, having that Indeedee live a couple extra turns in the very beginning of this game too was also very pivotal because you were able to still redirect that Spore and allow your Xerneas to continue to run, unchecked by really any of the Pokemon on that team. We only saw the Spore and the Pollen Puff from that Amoonguss. If it was carrying something like Clear Smog, I can see why it may not have wanted to use it and maybe have gone for it in game 3. But I still think that's just such a tough spot too, because nobody wants to send in their Pokemon in front of a Geomancy Xerneas, even if it's a great Xerneas check.
Yeah, with something like the Calyrex Shadow Rider teams, you do want to be hitting that Xerneas as quickly as you can before the Geomancy. Try and get the damage off before. We saw that in the game 1. The Xerneas got taken down to pretty much a quarter of its HP. Without setting up the Geomancy, that meant it couldn't do it in that game. But going for the nasty plot on that first turn, it didn't get the damage down onto the Xerneas to allow it to be put in range of some future attacks. I just gave it the free Geomancy completely. It was still at full health with that Geomancy. And because of the Follow Me, it was just going for the Psyshocks instead. So Astral Barrage wasn't hitting that Xerneas either. It was just left alone with its Geomancy boost, and then it just completely ran away with the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And that nasty plot is an interesting tech on Calyrex that I wish we could have looked at a little bit more because I'm sure if you get Calyrex with a nasty plot, it can be put in a really similar position to a Xerneas with a Geomancy. Having a +2 is basically like getting a double knockout with Astral Barrage and getting 2 Grimnay boosts, except you're doing it, I think a little bit more safely if you can protect yourself. So a really, really awesome game from both of these players. It's, I'm excited to see exactly what happens in the game 3 that we have today, the third match that we have, and if we see similar teams from either players, maybe if they were team building together. But a really nice way for Singapore to get put on the board, though. So we're going to take a quick break. Really fast round 1 for the both of us here, Jamie, but we will be back really soon with another game.